At its core, human life revolves around consciousness, the ephemeral core of subjective experience. We can't feel, think, be aware, or experience the world without it. Understanding what consciousness is all about has been a perennial conundrum for humans, dogged by centuries of philosophical debate and decades of neuroscientific study. New research raises the possibility that our long-held belief in consciousness, that it is merely an outcome of intricate brain processes, may be incorrect. This raises intriguing questions about whether or not consciousness is limited to the brains of humans and other animals, or whether it is an inherent part of nature. The ability to have subjective experiences, or the sensation of being something, is an imperfect but sufficient definition of consciousness. What Is It Like to Be a Bat? By Thomas Nagel is a well-known example of this idea in action. This is where he elaborated on the peculiar sense of echolocation that bats possess, which is completely different from the way humans perceive the world around them. Beyond simple thought and higher-order reasoning, this basic concept stresses that consciousness includes awareness and sentience. Basic felt experiences, like heat or pressure, show that even simple creatures lacking the cognitive complexity of humans may have kinds of awareness. Neuroscience has long held sway over the field of consciousness research, with the brain being held up as the center of all conscious experience due to its complexity. This assumption, although reasonable considering the brain's complexity, might stem from long-held but mistaken intuitions. When a person senses danger, for instance, they may act as if the conscious feeling of fear were a trigger. But studies in neuroscience show that our bodies react to dangers even before we realize it. This lag time, caused by the brain's binding processes, is an example of how awareness is frequently behind instantaneous unconscious processing. Although different types of sensory information, such as sight, sound, and touch, arrive at the brain at different times, binding processes bring all of these senses together to create a unified present moment. Our intuitive belief that consciousness drives behavior is called into question by this revelation. It implies that the process of making decisions or reacting is less of a driving factor and more of a story we tell ourselves after the fact. If awareness is not the conductor we think it is, then the question becomes whether or not it has any practical use. On the other hand, is it an incidental occurrence, like a bystander to the complex workings of the body? The complicated nature of consciousness and its separation from behavior is exemplified by the case of locked-in syndrome. This disorder rendered French journalist Jean-Dominique Bauby totally paralyzed after a stroke. The only movement he regained was the ability to blink his left eyelid. Bauby remained fully conscious and narrated his entire memoir, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, using a system of blinks, despite his inability to communicate conventionally. The moral of his story is that one's actions on the outside do not always reflect their true feelings and thoughts. Maybe other natural things have forms of awareness that we can't detect if human consciousness can stay in a suspended animation for so long. Consciousness may be more pervasive than previously believed, according to this line of thinking. Like gravity or electromagnetism, consciousness may be an essential aspect of being if it does not only result from neural complexity. The philosophical position known as Panpsychism, which holds that consciousness is inherent in all matter, is consistent with this idea. All things in the cosmos, from the tiniest particles to the most complex creatures, possess consciousness to varied degrees, according to this theory. Though it may appear speculative, this idea actually raises new questions in the scientific community. For example, how can we know for sure if inanimate objects or simpler systems like plants are conscious? It also becomes clear that the idea of shared conscious experiences is a controversial one. Could systems in some way link or overlap their subjective experiences if consciousness is fundamental? For a long time, the brilliant physicist Albert Einstein struggled to articulate his intuitive understanding of space-time in mathematical terms that laypeople could understand. Is it possible that in the not-too-distant future, technological and scientific breakthroughs will make it possible to directly communicate such gut feelings, overcoming the barriers of language and thought? These considerations are fraught with ethical implications. A lot of animals feel pain and suffering just like people do, according to what we know now. Our ethical landscape could be drastically changed if we expanded the domain of consciousness to include other systems like ecosystems or plants. One example is the fact that plants can show signs of basic awareness, such as responding to stimuli. Is it possible that these actions indicate some sort of intuitive feeling? Tell me how this would change the way people interact with the natural world. With this broader understanding of consciousness, even the foundation of our everyday perceptions could change. A deep feeling of interdependence is ushered in when one imagines the natural world as populated with conscious beings, insects, plants, and even microbes. Going for a walk in the woods may suddenly seem less like going on a solo adventure and more like weaving into a web of collective consciousness. These concepts pose a threat to the current materialist worldview, which attributes consciousness to random electrical activity in the brain. When it comes to explaining subjective experience in particular, this viewpoint has serious limitations. Even though neuroscientists keep finding connections between brain states and conscious states, they still haven't figured out why these connections exist. For what reasons does neuronal activity trigger emotions like joy or redness? This mystery, which has been called the hard problem of consciousness, is still one of the biggest obstacles in philosophy and science today. If awareness is indeed basic, it opens up fascinating avenues for further study. For instance, as AI systems advance, is it possible for them to display signs of consciousness? The current state of artificial intelligence is based entirely on algorithmic processes and does not rely on any subjective experience. But if awareness is not limited to the biological realm, could there be scenarios in which artificial systems acquire some awareness? A new paradigm for thinking about personhood, duties, and rights would be required in light of the enormous ethical implications of such a development. On the flip side, seeing consciousness as a shared experience has the potential to bolster conventional wisdom. For a long time, many Eastern philosophical and spiritual traditions have held that consciousness is the bedrock of reality. For example, Brahman is the supreme, all-encompassing reality in Hindu philosophy, and it is defined by pure awareness. Similar to the concept of a shared or universal consciousness, Buddhist teachings stress the interdependence of all living things and the illusion of separateness. There are practical insights into consciousness and how to cultivate it offered by these spiritual viewpoints as well. A more expansive awareness can be achieved through practices like mindfulness and meditation, which seek to transcend the egoic self. These conditions are compatible with the idea that consciousness may be a basic, limitless phenomenon. We may be getting closer to a unifying theory of consciousness that unites empirical and experiential knowledge as these old teachings become more and more entwined with contemporary science. A quest into the very nature of existence, the study of consciousness is more than just an intellectual pursuit. Humanity unlocks the door to incredible changes when it challenges long-held beliefs and welcomes the unknown. The pursuit of understanding consciousness, whether through empirical study, philosophical debate, or religious or philosophical reflection, is an ongoing source of inspiration and challenge, expanding our conception of awareness in a cosmos that may be alive with awareness.